Today we have 3 stories about people who are absolutely sure they have found the solution to all their problems. But they are wrong, and other people have to face the consequences. But before we get into today's stories, if you are a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, you have come to the right place because that's all we do. And we upload multiple times every single week. So if that is of interest to you, please offer the like button a nice fresh ice cream cone, but don't tell them you've secretly hidden a thumbtack in the middle of it. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories. Very late at night on May 19th, 2014, a young man named Youssef frantically dug a shovel into the dirt behind his home in the city of Fez, Morocco. He was on the verge of panic, so he tried to take deep breaths while he worked to calm himself down. But to be honest, this was basically impossible, because lying next to the hole that he was currently trying to dig was a woman's dead body. Just a few hours ago, Youssef had actually been on a date with this woman. Her name was Mina Elouari, and she lived more than 1,000 miles away in France. But she and Youssef had met online, and they had been talking long distance for a few months. And that morning, Mina had flown down to Morocco so they could finally meet in person. And Youssef had been incredibly nervous about this meeting. But when Mina had arrived at his house a few hours earlier that night to go on this date, everything had actually gone exactly right. He had made her dinner, and their conversation had been super easy and very lively, and they were laughing a lot of the time. It was like their chemistry online had perfectly translated to real life. It was great. That was until all of a sudden, in the middle of their meal and in the middle of laughing and having this wonderful time, Mina had gotten this weird spaced-out look on her face, and then she abruptly collapsed on the floor. Youssef had immediately rushed over to her to see if she was okay, but he quickly realized she hadn't just collapsed, she was dead. And Youssef, he had no idea why or how this was even possible. I mean, nothing had happened. They had just been talking and laughing and eating, and then she just dropped. And it was so shocking that Youssef hadn't been able to think straight. I mean, even now as he was digging this hole, his mind was a mess, and it was hard to focus on anything. But he did have one sort of single, clear thought that he just kept going back to that was driving his current behavior, which was everybody was going to think he killed her. I mean, the whole situation was undeniably weird and hard to believe. He knew the police would never buy that Mina had just randomly dropped dead immediately after flying to Morocco to meet him for the first time. Like, it immediately cast suspicion on Youssef. I mean, he knew what everyone was going to assume, police included. They would believe he had lured Mina there and killed her. He knew he looked incredibly guilty, and since there were no witnesses to back up his story, his word would mean nothing. To Youssef, it felt like he was going to spend his life in jail for a murder he didn't commit. So he decided the only way to protect himself was to try to cover everything up. Youssef dug as fast as he could, constantly looking over his shoulders, making sure his neighbors weren't watching or that nobody was outside. And then finally, after what felt like forever, when he felt like the hole was deep enough, he put the shovel down and then he took Mina's lifeless body. He rolled her into the hole and then he covered her right back up and just hoped that this was going to be enough to keep him from getting in trouble. Now, Youssef, after this was done, had sort of half expected to feel relieved that he had taken care of this problem. But over the next few days, he was so anxious about getting caught that he felt sick to his stomach most of the time. I mean, he couldn't function at work, and he canceled plans with his friends, and he could barely sleep. And then one morning, his worst nightmare came true. He heard a knock on his front door, and he opened it up to see 2 police officers standing on his doorstep. Youssef's heart pounded in his chest, but he somehow managed to stay relatively calm, and he smiled and he invited the officers inside. They all sat down in the living room, and Youssef, who is super anxious, is doing his best to appear normal. And as he's doing that, the officers explained to him that they were here to investigate the disappearance of Mina Elouari. And Youssef, pretty much the instant they said her name, he said, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry to hear about that, but I don't know of anybody by that name." But as the words were leaving his mouth, he could hear the anxiety coming off his own voice, and he could tell the officers instantaneously did not believe him. In fact, one of the officers just right away leaned forward and said that according to Mina's family, the last time they spoke to her, she was leaving her hotel to go meet you. Youssef froze for a moment and then he opened his mouth to try and respond, but his mind just went completely blank. He couldn't believe how stupid he was to have not even considered the fact that Mina's family might know where she was going. He knew that trying to cover this up had just made him look way more suspicious, and now he couldn't think of any way to get out of this except by telling the truth. And so Youssef just began sobbing and he blurted out the whole story. Mina had been at his house that night and she just suddenly died, and he panicked and he buried her in his backyard. But he insisted that he didn't kill her, and he begged them to just do an autopsy because it would prove that he was not responsible. She was dead. He just buried her. The officers were shocked by what they were hearing. This immediate confession that the person they're looking for is dead. This was shocking. One of the officers immediately jumped up with a cell phone and called for a forensics team. The other officer just looked at Yusef and shook his head. Yusef put his face in his hands and sobbed, realizing what a horrible mistake he had made by covering it up. He knew he was in trouble, but he believed the autopsy would at least prove he didn't kill her. That same day, Mina's body was exhumed from his backyard and taken to the coroner. And when the autopsy results came back, the police were actually surprised to find that Yusef was telling the truth. However, there was one thing Yusef didn't know. Just like Yusef had told the police, he was not responsible for Mina's random collapse on his floor during their date. Mina actually had undiagnosed diabetes and she had collapsed due to critically high blood sugar. So, that part was true. But Yusef's steadfast belief that he did not kill her was not correct. It would turn out that in his state of panic, after Mina collapsed, Yusef, who was very impulsive, had not been careful in confirming that Mina was actually dead. Because it would turn out she wasn't. Mina, because of her diabetes, was in a diabetic coma. So when Yusef buried her, she was still alive. He'd been so desperate to avoid getting in trouble for murder that he'd committed a murder. When the autopsy results came back, they showed Mina had died from suffocation after being buried in the ground. A truly horrific way to die. As for Yusef, he was charged with involuntary manslaughter. It is truly terrifying how a single moment of absolute panic can completely blind us to the reality of a situation. When we let fear take over, our brains have this way of convincing us that the most extreme actions are our only hope of survival. We see this happen all the time when people find themselves in stressful situations, but sometimes the tragedy does not come from a place of panic at all. Sometimes it comes from a place of absolute joy and triumph. People can be completely certain that they have just experienced the single best moment of their entire lives, completely unaware that their stroke of good luck is actually a hidden nightmare waiting to destroy everything they hold dear. And that brings us to our second story, which takes place on a beautiful tropical island where a young man thought he had just secured his family's future forever. Early in the afternoon of November 28, 1993, a young fisherman named Daniel haggled with a vendor at a bustling outdoor fish market in Monacara, which is a port city in Madagascar. This market was so loud, it was chaotic, and it was packed with hundreds and hundreds of locals. There were vendors who stood at their stands selling piles of fish out of plastic buckets on the ground or laid out on banana leaves and wooden pallets. And it was already getting very hot, and the air was buzzing with flies while stray dogs wandered through the lines of customers. But Daniel was not buying from these vendors. He was selling because earlier that morning he and his fishing crew had pulled in their nets and found a 6-foot-long bull shark tangled up in their netting. And for Daniel, this was literally the catch of a lifetime. This shark had so much meat on it, he was sure it would sell for more than his crew normally made in a whole month. This was huge. And so Daniel and this vendor, they haggle for a bit longer, and then they finally settle on a price. And Daniel, can't believe the vendor is going to pay that much money. This was an astounding amount of money. And then as the vendor pulled out a big wad of bills and began peeling off how much he was going to pay Daniel, Daniel couldn't believe it. This was not just the most money he had ever made at one time in his life. This was easily the most, but more than that, this was literally the most cash he had ever seen in person all at once. This was life-changing money. And as soon as those bills were handed over to Daniel for a moment, he just looked at the money like, how can this be, folded them up? He stuffed it in his pocket. And then he handed off all the shark meat, and then he turned and walked out of the market. Later that night, Daniel sat at the dinner table with his family while his uncle raised a cup to toast Daniel's big catch. The family had actually already spent a little bit of the money that Daniel had earned from the shark on this celebratory meal. The table was full of food and alcohol. This was a feast. And Daniel, he was feeling really proud. He was actually the youngest fisherman in his family. So, the fact that he had been the one who made this catch was a really big deal. And so once his uncle finished this elaborate toast about how great Daniel was, Daniel just smiled and then downed his own cup in a single gulp. And the alcohol really burned his throat, but he managed to get it down without wincing. And then he told everyone to dig in. About 6 hours later, Daniel woke up covered in sweat. His tongue was tingling like he had just eaten something really spicy. And there was also this strange, metallic taste in his mouth. He tried to sit up and he realized that actually his legs were tingly too. The burning sensation in his mouth kept getting worse and worse until Daniel was desperate for something to drink. He tried to stand but fell right out of bed, knocking over his lamp. And the crash brought Daniel's aunt and uncle running into the room, and Daniel, he told them to please get him some water. So his aunt, in a panic, she turned and she ran out and came back a few seconds later with a cup of water. Daniel, he grabbed the